Story 1. The apartment beneath mine. I moved into apartment 5C in the dead of January. The kind of cold that rattles bones and makes your breath linger indoors. It wasn't my first choice, but after the divorce, I wasn't looking for charm, just cheap rent and quiet walls. The building was old, cracked around the edges like a smile held too long. Brick facade, iron railings with peeling black paint, and hallways that always smelled faintly of mildew and something sweet, like rotting fruit. My place was small, one bedroom, rust-stained sink, a radiator that groaned like it resented being alive. But I liked the solitude. No roommates, no shared walls. Just me and whatever life was supposed to be after the dust of everything settled. The landlord, an old man named Mr. Derrick, handed me the keys with a shrug. "No one bothers anyone here," he said. "And no pets. Pipes are sensitive." I didn't own a pet. Or much of anything anymore. For the first few weeks, things were still. Snow muffled the city noise, and I fell into a rhythm: freelance work during the day, coffee late into the night, the occasional movie. Sleep came unevenly, but that wasn't new. What changed came slowly. It started with footsteps. Not above me, below. I remember the first time clearly. It was around 2:40 in the morning, sometime in early February. I was up late working on a client logo, music low in my headphones, when I felt a vibration through the floorboards beneath my desk. Not an earthquake. Just weight. Rhythmic. Someone walking. I paused the music, sat still. Listened. 3 steps. Pause. Then 4 more, fading away. My building had thick floors. When the neighbor upstairs dropped something, it sounded like it happened in the next room. But this was different. Muted. Like it was happening in my own space, just deeper. I brushed it off. Maybe someone moved into 4C. I hadn't seen anyone, but I wasn't exactly peering through peepholes. People lived their lives quietly here. The next night, I heard it again. This time, it moved under the hallway near my bathroom. I followed the sound, bare feet pressing against the chilled hardwood, but of course, there was nothing. Just the faint hiss of the radiator and my own reflection in the bathroom mirror, looking slightly more tired than the night before. By the end of the week, it wasn't just footsteps. There were little sounds, like the click of fingernails against the counter. Soft humming that stopped the moment I turned off the faucet or shut the laptop. A spoon that ended up beside the heating vent every morning, though I never placed it there. Still, I didn't tell anyone. What could I say? That someone might be squatting in the apartment below, moving things in mine? I saw Mr. Derrick in the stairwell that weekend, his breath steaming in the air between us. "Someone finally take 4C?" I asked casually. He blinked, then squinted at the snow-covered steps. "No. That one's been empty 3 years." I must have looked confused. "I've just heard things." He gave a tired smile, one side of his mouth curling up, the other down like it didn't want to play along. "Old building. Pipes knock, floor settles, winter breeze weird through the walls." I nodded, but something about the way he said it, too rehearsed, too tidy, stuck with me. Like he'd answered that same question before. Maybe more than once. That night, I laid on the couch instead of my bed. Just to see if the sounds followed me. I left the lights off and the blinds open, letting the weak glow from the street lamps slant through. The radiator hissed. My fridge clicked once, like it always did when the motor turned off. And then I heard it again. Footsteps. Only this time, they matched mine. I lifted my arm. A soft thud mirrored beneath. I tapped the side of the couch. Another tap followed, muffled and slightly delayed, as if trying to stay in sync. I didn't move for a long time. Just laid there, staring at the ceiling, listening. My heart wasn't racing, just slow, steady dread curling up behind my ribs like it had always been there, waiting. Eventually, the sound stopped. I told myself I must have fallen asleep, dreamed part of it. But in the morning, the spoon was back. This time, standing upright beside the vent. Perfectly balanced. I didn't touch it. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee gone cold and looked at the floor. Thought about calling someone, Derek again, maybe a building inspector. But what was I going to say? That the floor was mimicking me? That a spoon had learned to stand? I did something different that day. Left the apartment. Walked to a coffee shop 5 blocks away and sat there for hours, watching people pass outside. It wasn't fear, exactly. Just a creeping sense that I was overstaying my welcome. Like whatever was under me had been fine being left alone, until I started noticing it. When I got home, the apartment was cold. Colder than it should have been, even for February. I checked the radiator, but it was humming along. My breath clouded in front of me, just once, and then faded. I found the spoon inside the bathroom sink. By mid-February, I stopped using the bedroom. It wasn't conscious at first. I just began falling asleep on the couch more often, leaving the TV on low, letting voices fill the corners of the room where silence had started to feel too thick. The bedroom door stayed shut. I told myself it was warmer in the living room, closer to the radiator, but that wasn't really it. Something about the back wall, where the vent from below passed through, made my skin crawl in ways I couldn't articulate. I stopped checking the thermostat. I stopped checking a lot of things. The spoon was still appearing. Every morning. Sometimes on the vent. Sometimes on the sink. Once, wedged into the frame of the front door. I hadn't eaten with it in days. I kept it hidden in the cabinet, deep in a pile of plastic takeout utensils. Still, it found its way out. Not a duplicate. The same one. Slight curve at the end. Small dent in the bowl. I would know. On the 14th, Valentine's Day, I got a call from my ex. I didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since the papers were signed. Instead, I watched the snow melt in slow lines down the window pane and thought about love, and how easily it turns into something unrecognizable. That night I sat at the edge of the tub brushing my teeth and caught it. Just for a second. Movement. The mirror. I hadn't moved. Nothing behind me. But the glass shifted, slightly. A shadow, or maybe just a flicker of the hallway light. I watched it for a long time. Then reached behind the mirror, searching for gaps or strings or anything mechanical. It was solid. Bolted to the wall. Nothing strange. But I couldn't unsee it. Later, as I drifted toward sleep on the couch, I heard it again. The movement. But this time, it wasn't just below. It was above. Soft creaking, exactly over my head. As though someone was pacing in a slow circle directly on the ceiling. I stared upward, holding my breath, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. The weight pressed down, faintly but consistently, like a whisper of gravity where it shouldn't be. I stood up. The ceiling fan hung still. The sound kept going. Then I realized, it wasn't the ceiling. It was the vent behind the couch. The metal grill was vibrating slightly, a low, rhythmic tapping behind it. Like knuckles, or maybe fingernails, brushing slowly back and forth. I crouched, leaned close, and listened. It stopped. I stayed there a long time, knees on hardwood, ears inches from the cold metal, hearing only my own pulse and the soft hum of distant traffic. When I stood, I noticed something. On the grill's edge. A smear. Grayish. Thumb-sized. Grease? Dust? I touched it. Not dust. Sticky. Faintly warm. I went to wash my hands, but the bathroom door creaked as I passed, and, for some reason, I didn't go in. Instead, I opened my laptop and started searching. Hearing sounds from empty apartment below. Old building, footsteps in walls. Spoon showing up in different place each day, not a prank. The answers were worse than nothing. Ghost forums. Prank explanations. Mold paranoia. One person suggested carbon monoxide poisoning. I didn't feel sick. Just wrong. At 3:12 a.m., a message notification popped up in the corner of the screen. From unknown user. Subject 4C. I stared at it, then opened it. Just a single line inside. Don't let it in. No signature. No sender information. Nothing. I closed the laptop. I don't know why I did it, but I slid the coffee table aside and unscrewed the vent grill. 4 screws. Old, rusted. The metal came away with a dry groan. Inside, darkness. A shaft stretching downward into nothing, lined with warped metal and shadows. The air smelled strange, like wet stone and something else. Something metallic. I leaned closer. Not enough to see far, but enough to feel. The warmth. Not heat from the radiator. Not rising warmth. It pulsed. A slow, steady throb of warmth that felt alive. I put the grill back. The next morning, there was no spoon. For the first time in over a week, nothing was out of place. I didn't feel relieved. I felt watched. I sat on the floor with my coffee, staring at the vent, not drinking, not blinking. At 9 o'clock, I finally dressed and knocked on the door of 5B across the hall. A woman answered, mid-40s, thin, eyes like she hadn't slept properly in a while. She looked me over but didn't smile. Sorry, I said, rubbing the back of my neck. I live across the way. Just wanted to ask if you ever hear sounds? She didn't respond right away. Her eyes flicked past me, toward my door. Then she stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. You hear it too? I nodded. She looked down the hall. Her voice dropped. Don't talk to it. Don't ask questions. And don't open the vent again. I blinked. How did you? She didn't answer. Just turned, went back inside, and locked the door behind her. I stood there for a while, feeling the chill creep under my coat. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The footsteps came again. But this time, they weren't below. They were behind the wall. I told myself I wouldn't go down there. I repeated it the way people repeat prayers, softly and with the hope that repetition itself might be enough to keep something at bay. But the more I said it, the more my body moved in the opposite direction. My feet drifted toward the door. My hand reached for the knob. I kept saying I wouldn't. But I did. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Cold. The sun never really broke through the clouds, just hovered behind them like a dim thought you couldn't quite place. I had work to finish, 3 client emails sat unanswered, but I couldn't bring myself to open the laptop. Instead, I stood in front of the door to 4C. I don't remember deciding to go. I was just there, in the hallway, breath visible, coat unzipped. The building was quiet. A kind of quiet that doesn't invite silence but dares you to disturb it. The door to 4C looked like every other door, same faded paint, same brass knob dulled by age. But it felt heavier in the air around it. Like the hallway narrowed here. Like the lights dimmed just slightly. I knocked once. Out of habit, maybe. Maybe hope. Nothing answered. Of course. I turned the knob. It wasn't locked. The door opened an inch. I froze. Listened. No sound. So I pushed. The air inside hit me before the darkness did. Heavy. Not foul, just dense. Like a room that had been sealed too long. Dry dust and something faintly sharp, like old metal or rusted nails. The light from the hallway didn't stretch far inside, just a few feet. The rest dissolved into shadow. I stepped in. The floor creaked beneath me. The door swung shut behind without being touched. I didn't jump, but I felt it, like a thread pulling tight between my shoulder blades. The apartment was empty. Mostly. No furniture. No curtains. Just outlines on the floor where things had once been, and faint discolorations on the wall like echoes of vanished paintings. It was colder here than upstairs. Not freezing, just wrong. I walked slowly, each step measured, careful not to breathe too loud. The kitchen was bare. The bathroom door hung open, mirror cracked but intact. The bedroom was dark, even with the blinds missing. There was no sign anyone had lived here in years. And yet, the floor was clean. No dust. No cobwebs. The air smelled too fresh, like something had been scrubbed away. I reached the living room and stopped. The vent. It was the same shape, same placement as mine, directly across from where I slept every night upstairs. But here it was open. Not unscrewed. Not broken. Open. Bent outward at the corners, like something had pushed from the inside. The metal edges warped outward slightly, as though something had climbed out, or tried to. I crouched and looked inside. It didn't go far. Maybe 5 feet of visible tunnel before the darkness swallowed the rest. But on the inside edge, right at the lip, were scratches. Not deep. Just enough to catch light. Like fingernails. I leaned closer. And I heard it. Not loud. Not clear. Breathing. Not mine. Lower. Measured. Waiting. I stood, too quickly, bumping into the wall behind me. My shoulder stung, but I barely registered it. The apartment felt smaller now. Like the walls had drawn in. I stepped back toward the front door, not turning around. Something about turning felt dangerous. Like whatever was behind me was only real if I acknowledged it. My hand found the knob. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, harder this time, but it stayed firm. I wasn't locked in. I was held. That's when I heard it. From the hallway outside. 3 soft knocks. Not on this door. On mine. Upstairs. Then a pause. And 3 knocks again. I stood still, one hand on the door, the other by my side, and listened as the knocks continued, steady, patient, like it had all the time in the world. Then I heard the footsteps. Not here. Up there? In my apartment. Slow. Pacing. I don't remember unlocking the door. I don't remember running up the stairs. But suddenly I was in front of 5C, key shaking in my hand, jamming it into the lock. When the door swung open, I expected something. But the apartment was empty. No sound. No movement. Nothing out of place. Except for the spoon. It was back. Resting on my pillow. I picked it up. Warm. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next. I left the vent sealed. I didn't leave the apartment again for 3 days. On the 4th morning, I called Mr. Derrick. "Hey," I said. My voice cracked. "Has anyone ever mentioned sounds in this building? Or anything strange?" There was a pause on the line. Then, "You're in 5C, right?" "Yeah." Longer pause. "I'd keep the vents closed." Click. That was it. No explanation. No warning. Just that. It's been a month. I still hear it. Sometimes it knocks. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I wake up and the spoon's in my hand, even though I stopped bringing it to bed. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm too tired to stay awake but too scared to sleep, I swear I hear someone breathing right beneath the floorboards. Breathing in time with mine. Slower. Softer. And sometimes, just sometimes, I wonder if it's not in 4C at all anymore. Maybe it never was. Maybe it's been here the whole time. Waiting. Story 2. The Man in the Yellow Raincoat. I moved into the house on Sycamore Lane in October of 2014. It was a small place, tucked at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of street where neighbors wave from their driveways but rarely speak. I was 28, living alone for the first time. It wasn't perfect. Low ceilings, scuffed hardwood, an awkward slope in the living room floor, but it was mine. After years of saving while working remote IT support from my parents' garage, I'd finally scraped together enough for a deposit. My routine was predictable. I worked evenings, usually from 4 in the afternoon until midnight. Afterward, I'd heat something simple, canned soup, a frozen meal, and wind down with a book or a show. I didn't go out much. Didn't have to. I liked the stillness, especially at night when the world felt paused. It started raining the second week I was there. That cold, brittle sort of rain that doesn't pour so much as whisper against the glass. I remember it clearly because the gutters overflowed and soaked the flower bed I had tried, optimistically, to plant the day before. I gave up on gardening after that. The first time I saw him, it was raining. I was in the kitchen making tea, staring absent-mindedly through the narrow window above the sink. The streetlight at the edge of the cul-de-sac flickered like it always did, buzzing faintly, haloed by the mist. And then I noticed him. A man. Standing under the street lamp, facing my house. He wore a yellow raincoat. Not modern, not sporty. Old-fashioned. Faded mustard, with oversized buttons and a hood pulled too far forward. His hands hung at his sides. He didn't move. I waited for him to turn, to keep walking, to do anything. He didn't. After maybe 30 seconds, I stepped away from the window. I didn't like how long I'd been staring. It felt impolite somehow, like I was the one intruding. When I looked back again, he was gone. I told myself it was nothing. A pedestrian. A neighbor from one of the other houses. I hadn't met many of them yet, and the rain distorted everything, shapes, distances, time. It could have been anyone. Still, I locked the back door that night. I usually didn't. The next day, I forgot about it. Work was busy, and I spent most of the afternoon resolving a network error for a small insurance firm. By midnight, I was drained. I reheated leftover pasta, curled up on the couch, and let the low chatter of a sitcom fill the background. The rain returned. I heard it before I saw it, soft tapping against the kitchen window, gentle but persistent. I got up to turn off the lights. As I passed the window, I paused. Just a glance. He was there again. Same spot. Same raincoat. Still facing the house. I didn't move this time. I just stood and watched, waiting for him to lift an arm or shift his weight or acknowledge the cold. Nothing. His posture didn't waver. I told myself again, neighbor. Maybe he walks at night. Maybe he stands there waiting for someone. Maybe the coat isn't even yellow and I'm just seeing reflections wrong. I didn't believe it. I left the light on in the living room when I went to bed. The next day, I asked the woman who lived 3 houses down, Marie, I think her name was. We'd spoken once or twice when our garbage bins crossed paths. Ever see a guy walking around here at night? I asked, keeping it light. Wearing a yellow coat? She furrowed her brow. In this weather? She shook her head. I doubt it. Nobody walks here after dark. Especially not lately. What do you mean? She hesitated. Someone broke into the Jenkins shed last week. Nothing stolen. Just left open. Things moved around. It's probably kids. I nodded, even though I wasn't thinking about sheds. That night, no rain came. The sky stayed clear, the pavement dry. I kept glancing out the window anyway. No one was there. 2 days passed. Then 3. The weather stayed cold, but dry. I relaxed a little. Started chalking it up to overactive imagination. Sleep deprivation. The stress of moving. There's always a transition period when you live alone. Then came Sunday. It rained again. Around 11:30, I got up to refill my glass of water. I didn't look outside at first. I'd been trying not to check. Trying not to make it a thing. But I heard something. Not a knock. Not footsteps. A voice. Low. Muffled. As if spoken into fabric. I froze, cup half full, listening through the window. Then I heard it again. Emily. My name. Clearly spoken. Not shouted. Not whispered. Just stated. As if to confirm I was there. I turned off the kitchen lights slowly. Stood in the dark and looked outside. He was there. But closer. Not on the sidewalk anymore. Not under the streetlight. At the edge of my lawn. Facing the house. Head tilted slightly, like he was studying the windows. I backed away. My phone was on the coffee table. I picked it up, unlocked it, hovered over the keypad. I didn't call. I don't know why. I sat on the floor, lights off, phone in hand, heart steady but loud. When I looked again, he was gone. By morning, the rain had stopped. The grass glistened. I checked outside. No footprints. No sign anyone had stood there. Just a wet leaf stuck to the front door. Nothing else. I try not to talk about it. There's a strange thing that happens when you start second-guessing your own sense of safety. Your instinct isn't to seek help. It's to stay quiet. Keep it close. As if saying something aloud might somehow make it real. The man in the yellow raincoat hadn't returned since Sunday. That was 5 days ago. The weather had stayed dry. The wind sharp, skies low and gray, but no rain. I almost convinced myself it had ended. I kept busy. Took more shifts, even when they didn't need me. Anything to fill the time between dusk and midnight. I started bringing my laptop into the kitchen, working with the blinds drawn tight, facing the door. Still, I caught myself listening. There were noises now I couldn't account for. A soft scrape across the front porch on Tuesday night. A tapping sound behind the living room wall early Thursday morning. Both faint, both easy to dismiss. But they stayed with me. Friday, I went out for groceries just before noon. I rarely left the house before 4, but something about daylight felt safe. I walked past Marie's house and saw her pulling weeds by the fence. I hesitated, then waved. She gave a small nod, but didn't say anything. Her posture stiffened the moment she saw me. As if I had already said too much. I didn't mention the man. Didn't mention that sometimes, when I passed the front window too quickly, I thought I saw a shape in the reflection. Or that I started keeping the porch light on even during the day. Or that I hadn't slept through the night since the last time it rained. That night, I went to bed at 1, still dry outside, a full moon filtering through thin clouds. I left the hallway light on, more habit than fear now. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of rain hitting the roof. Light at first, then steadier. I stayed in bed, eyes open, blanket pulled to my chin. A minute passed. Then another. And then a knock. Not loud. Not on the front door. Not sharp enough to be deliberate. 3 light taps. Bedroom window. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The curtains were closed. I could feel him there, on the other side of the thin glass. Close enough to touch. Listening. No voice this time. Just the rain. I lay there until sunrise. When I finally checked, the grass outside was soaked. Nothing else. No prints in the mud. No signs anyone had walked there. But the porch light was off. I hadn't turned it off. Later that morning, I left a message with the local police non-emergency line. Just in case. A man named Officer Hayes came by around 2. He was polite, a little skeptical, but he walked the perimeter and checked the windows. No forced entry. No damage, he said, writing on a pad. Could have been a prank. Kids messing around. I nodded. Do you want us to file a report? I hesitated. Not if there's nothing to report. He gave me a card anyway. Told me to call if I saw him again. I didn't mention the yellow coat. I didn't want to hear the tone of his voice change. That night, I dragged a chair into the hallway and sat there until 4 a.m. No rain. No knock. Just the occasional creak of old wood and my own pulse in my ears. The next day, the card was gone. The one Hayes gave me. I'd left it on the kitchen counter. When I went to reach for it that afternoon, it wasn't there. Not in the drawer. Not anywhere. I checked the trash. Nothing. I didn't tell myself I misplaced it. I didn't pretend I forgot where it was. I knew exactly where I left it. Sunday came. Then Monday. Dry skies, low wind. I started to feel ridiculous again. And then Tuesday morning, I found the yellow thread. Just a single strand, no longer than my finger, snagged on the edge of the screen door. Not gold, not bright. Dull, aged. Same color as his coat. I stared at it for a long time before brushing it into the trash. My hand shook afterward. I couldn't explain why. That night I heard it again. Not outside. Inside. The faint rustle of fabric. Not walking. Just movement, like someone shifting their weight slowly. From the kitchen. Then silence. I stood by the bedroom door, staring into the dark. Then, closer. Behind the wall. My bedroom shared a wall with the coat closet in the front hall. I opened the door quietly, reached inside for the pull chain. The bulb flickered on. Empty. I leaned in. No noise. But the smell, damp. Not mold. Not decay. Rain. Not just the scent of wet ground. Actual rain. That metallic smell of soaked fabric. It shouldn't have been there. I left the closet door open and slept with the lamp on. In the morning, I checked every inch of the house. Vents, crawl space, cabinets. Everything was untouched. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He wasn't just outside anymore. He didn't need the rain to get closer. He was learning the rhythm of the house. My rhythm. Where I walked. When I slept. What I feared. That evening, as I passed the kitchen window to draw the curtain, I caught my reflection. But I wasn't moving. For a full second, my body in the glass stayed still while I took a step forward. Just one beat behind. Then it caught up. I didn't look again. I stopped checking the weather. It no longer mattered whether it was supposed to rain. Sometimes he came anyway. Sometimes he didn't. The patterns I tried to find were gone now. What replaced them wasn't logic. It was something else, something slower, heavier. A presence. The feeling that every moment, someone was memorizing me. That Wednesday, the sun stayed out longer than usual. A clear, crisp afternoon. Shadows stretched across the lawn like spilled ink. I sat on the couch, blinds half drawn, watching the front window the way people watch water boil. Nothing happened. No footsteps. No whisper. Just stillness. But I knew he'd come. I don't know how I knew. Just that I did. Around 5 o'clock, I boiled pasta and set it aside. Ate none of it. The phone stayed on the table, fully charged. My hand hovered over it more than once, but I didn't call anyone. I'd stopped trying to explain things. Even I wasn't sure anymore if I was being watched, or if I had simply invited the idea in, and now it refused to leave. At 6:30, the clouds began to gather. Not dark ones. Just enough to dim the light. Enough to shift the air. I moved to the hallway, turned on the porch light, and stood by the front door. I didn't open it. I didn't look through the peephole. I waited. And at 7:12 he arrived. I didn't see him approach. 1 minute the porch was empty. The next, I heard the boards creak. A faint, deliberate sound. The kind a person makes when they know you're listening. I stood there, maybe 2 feet from him, with only a door between us. He didn't knock. Didn't speak. But I heard it, his coat. That soft crinkle of water-soaked fabric shifting gently as he breathed. I imagined the hood pulled too far forward. The curve of his shoulders, always slightly tilted. The way he never flinched or turned, just stood. Waiting. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I wanted it to end. Maybe I'd been pulled forward by something I didn't understand. I unlocked the door. Opened it slowly. The porch light flickered. And he was gone. I stepped outside. The street was empty. No sound but the faint rattle of wind through the gutters. No smell of rain, but the air felt thick, like something had just passed through. The porch boards were dry. But the doormat was soaked. I looked up and down the road. Houses dimly lit, blinds closed. Nothing moved. I waited there for a while, half expecting him to reappear. He didn't. But something had shifted. I felt it in the soles of my feet, in the way the light pressed against my skin. The moment I stepped outside, I knew I'd done something I couldn't undo. I turned to go back in, and froze. The window beside the front door. From outside, I could see inside. And someone was standing in my hallway. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stared. My own face, blurry, wrong, almost but not quite mine, looking out from the glass. Head tilted slightly. Like his had been. I blinked. It vanished. When I stepped back inside, The hallway was empty. The air was still. Everything untouched. But the smell returned. Wet cloth. Cold metal. Earth. I checked every room. No signs of entry. No marks. No footprints. But the lights felt dimmer. My eyes kept drifting to corners. I stayed awake until dawn, every light on. When morning came, I found the porch light bulb on the kitchen counter. Dry. Unbroken. I hadn't removed it. I know that. Later that day, I opened the coat closet and found something I hadn't noticed before. Carved into the wood panel behind the hangers, barely visible unless the light hit it at the right angle. A name. Mine. Etched cleanly. Precise. As if it had always been there. I didn't touch it. I just closed the door. That night, I tried something different. I left the front door unlocked. I didn't want to invite him. I just wanted to see what would happen. At 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the screen door squeaking open. Then nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just waiting. I didn't check. I stayed in bed, hands tucked under the covers like a child afraid of being seen. I don't know how long I lay there. Time blurred. In the morning, the door was still locked. But there was a puddle on the living room floor. No tracks. Just a small, perfect circle of water. As if someone had stood in one spot. Watching. I mopped it up. Didn't speak for the rest of the day. Didn't answer my phone. Didn't eat. Something about the silence had changed. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the shape of it. Like the house was holding its breath with me. At dusk, I stood in the hallway again. I didn't open the door this time. But I spoke. Quietly. Calmly. I know you're still here. No answer. But the light above me dimmed. Just for a second. Then returned. That night I slept. Not well. But I slept. He hasn't shown up since. Not outside, at least. But sometimes, in the mirror, I catch something standing just a step behind me. Not in focus. Not solid. Just close enough to know it's still there. And every time it rains now, I don't go outside. Because I don't think I ever really came back in. Story 3. The third floor doesn't exist. I worked nights at Red Pine Regional Hospital for almost 4 years. It was the kind of job people didn't ask much about. Small town, understaffed, low pay. But it paid enough, and the routine suited me. I liked quiet. I liked knowing where everything was, who I was working with, and how long I had to keep going until the sun came up. I started as an orderly when I was 23. By 25, I had keys to everything and a badge that let me into the supply floors. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Red Pine had 2 main patient levels. The ground floor, which was mostly ER and admissions, and the second, where most of the beds were. ICU was tucked near the end, by the old stairwell we never used. A few of the admin offices sat on the mezzanine between 1 and 2, but no one called that a third floor. No one ever had. I remember the night in question because it was slow. Early spring. Still cold enough to see your breath walking to your car, but warm enough that the flu season was winding down. Fewer patients meant more trips to restock linens and check monitors. Around 2 a.m., I took the elevator to central storage. The building hummed low, like it always did at that hour. A mix of recycled air and machines doing their work in the background. Familiar. I tapped the button for the basement, and leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes half shut. My body moved on autopilot by that point in the shift. The elevator jerked. Not hard. Just enough to break my rhythm. The panel above the door glitched, flickered between numbers, then blinked out. A second later, it lit up again. I frowned. There was no third floor. I stepped forward, almost laughing to myself, waiting for the display to correct itself. The hospital was old. Elevator hiccups weren't unheard of. The doors opened. It wasn't the basement. I didn't step out right away. Just stood at the threshold, waiting to recognize something. I expected plywood, A maintenance closet, maybe just concrete and wiring. But what I saw looked finished. Tile floors. Pale green walls, same as the patient floors. Dim overhead lights buzzing faintly. A desk sat at the end of the corridor, with a monitor dark and a rolling chair turned sideways. Everything in place. Just no one there. I didn't hear anything. Not even the usual mechanical hum the rest of the hospital had. It felt as if the place had been left paused. Not abandoned. Not under renovation. Just still. I should have hit the button. Closed the doors. Gone back down. But my feet moved forward. One step. Then another. The hallway smelled different. Not antiseptic. Not old. Just faintly metallic, like warm wires or dust on a heating coil. I moved quietly, like I might wake someone. 3 rooms on the left. 2 on the right. Each with its door slightly ajar, like they'd been left open for someone who never arrived. No labels. No numbers. I leaned into the first room. Empty. A bed stripped. One overhead light flickering above. The blanket on the chair by the wall looked freshly folded. The second room was the same. The third different. Not empty. A monitor blinked softly in the corner, though it showed no vitals. Just a single green line unmoving. No patient. No wires connected. I reached for the light switch. It was already on. Still, the room remained dim. The corners especially, like the shadows had soaked too far into the walls. A soft beep echoed down the hall. I turned. The monitor at the nurse's station blinked to life. Just for a second. Then darkness again. I took a step back toward the elevator. That's when I heard the voice. Low. Steady. Female, maybe? Or something like a voice. Stay. Just that word. Not angry. Not loud. But I felt it. Behind my ribs. The way you feel a sound more than hear it. I moved faster then. Walked. Not ran. Something about running didn't feel safe. Like it would make me part of whatever this was. The elevator was still open. Still waiting. I stepped in. Pressed a button for the ground floor. Nothing happened. The doors stayed open. The hallway behind me still silent. Then, with a groan, the elevator began to descend. The doors slid shut. The panel flickered, then showed 1. When I stepped out onto the first floor, the fluorescent lights hit me harder than usual. I blinked, rubbed my hands together. The air smelled normal again. Cleaning chemicals. Coffee from the break room. The soft shuffle of nurses down the hall. Everything in place. I didn't tell anyone. Back in the staff closet, I sat on the bench for a while. I looked at my watch. Only 6 minutes had passed. Later, I checked the floor plan on the old laminated map posted in the stairwell. 1. 2. Basement. No third. I checked the elevator again at 4 a.m. It skipped from 2 to B. Like always. By morning, I had convinced myself I'd imagined it. But I kept thinking about that voice. Not what it said. The way it sounded. Like it had been waiting a long time to speak. I left Red Pine 2 months after that last shift. I told people it was burnout. Most believed me. Those who'd worked nights long enough understood the look, tired under the eyes in a way sleep doesn't fix. I didn't tell them the real reason. Not because I was afraid they'd think I was losing it, but because I wasn't confident they'd be wrong. The thing is, I never went back to the 3rd floor. I didn't need to. Whatever was there followed me in a way I can't explain, not directly. There were no apparitions, no knocks at the door, no flickering lights. It was quieter than that. Smaller. But constant. It started with the hallway in my apartment. I'd lived in that place for over a year without a second thought. Plain walls. Cheap carpet. Always smelled like laundry detergent no matter what I did. After that night, though, the hallway seemed longer. Not in a way you could measure. Not visibly. It just felt stretched. As if the space between the bedroom and the kitchen wasn't fixed anymore. Some nights, I'd walk down it and swear the light took just a second longer to reach the end. Then came the dreams. Not full nightmares, those would have been easier to dismiss. These were calm, slow, and quiet. Always the same. I was standing in the elevator. The lights above the door flickering. Sometimes the number never appeared. Sometimes it showed 3, before I even pressed anything. The doors would open. But I never saw what was beyond. I'd wake up before stepping out. Every time. The smell was the worst part. Hospitals have their own scent, bleach and plastic and something faintly sweet like rubber gloves. But this wasn't that. This was older. Dry. Stale, like heat trapped in vents. It started clinging to my clothes. I'd be walking through the grocery store and catch it, sudden and unmistakable, like I'd just walked past a vent blowing air from a place that hadn't been opened in years. No one else noticed. One morning, I found a smear on my bathroom mirror. A wide vertical streak, like someone had dragged a cloth across it without looking. I live alone. I wiped it clean. The next day, it was there again. Slightly lower. Same motion. I started closing the bathroom door at night. Locked it. Even though that didn't really make sense. I didn't hear voices. But I heard sound. Low and consistent. Not from the walls. From inside me. Like the kind of humming that comes before a migraine. A pressure. Sometimes it came when I sat too still. Sometimes in moments of quiet, washing dishes, folding laundry, I'd find myself pausing, listening for something I couldn't name. Not waiting for a noise. Just recognizing one that had never stopped. I told myself I was tired. That maybe the hospital had left more of a mark on me than I thought. That maybe some part of me needed the place, the routine, the quiet halls, the illusion of order. I started looking into Red Pine online. There was barely anything. No mentions of renovations. No reference to a third floor. No one else seemed to have experienced anything unusual. I even found a staff directory from 2010 scanned into an old web archive. Floor plans included. Ground. Second. Basement. That was it. But the thing that made me stop looking came from a message board. An old post. Buried deep. No replies. Dated a year before I started working there. It said, "If the elevator shows 3, don't step out. If you already have, you'll understand what I mean." That was all. No name. No follow-up. I closed the tab and never searched again. I wish I could say it faded. That after enough time, I moved on, forgot it, filed it away as stress or imagination. But it didn't fade. It adapted. Now I catch glimpses of hallways where there shouldn't be any. Reflections in windows that linger half a second longer than they should. Once, I walked into the stairwell of my new apartment building and saw a door I didn't recognize 2 floors down. I didn't open it. But I stood there for a long time. I've changed since then. I keep lights on more than I used to. I avoid elevators when I can. I take stairs, even when I'm tired. I never walk past hospital buildings at night. And I never, ever, ignore strange numbers on control panels. Last month, someone from Red Pine called. Said they were updating their alumni records. Asked if I'd consider returning. I told them no. The woman on the phone paused. Then asked, "Just curious, Mark, did you ever use the east elevator? The old one near Supply?" I didn't respond. She thanked me and hung up. I didn't catch her name. But the call log on my phone listed it as coming from unknown. The next morning, a note had been slid under my door. Plain paper. Nothing printed. Just one word, written in narrow, careful handwriting. Stay. I didn't tell anyone about the 3rd floor. Not because I was afraid of being dismissed, but because I wasn't sure I hadn't imagined it. There's a kind of fatigue that creeps in after years of working nights. It wears down your edges. Blurs things. Makes shadows stretch longer than they should. You begin to doubt your own senses. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. For days afterward, I found myself watching the elevator panel whenever I used it. Half hoping, half dreading it might flicker again. It didn't. Always 1-2B. As if that night never happened. Still, something changed. It started small. A patient asked if someone had been in their room during the night. Said they'd heard footsteps outside the door around 3 a.m. But when I checked the logs, no one had rounded on them since midnight. Then a nurse misplaced her penlight and found it hours later in a drawer at the end of the hall, one she swore she hadn't opened. Minor things. Easy to dismiss. But they stacked. On the 5th night after I'd seen it, I found myself alone on shift. Staffing had been tight, and half the team was covering ER downstairs. Around 2:45 a.m., I was sent to restock the medication bins. The carts were kept near the elevator on the 2nd floor. As I wheeled the bins back to their station, the elevator chimed behind me. I hadn't pressed anything. I turned. The doors were open. Empty. That alone wasn't strange. Sometimes it got called to a floor and no one got in. But the panels showed no floor. Just a dash. Not 1. Not 2. Not B. Just. The air inside was warm. Not hot. Not cold. Just used. Like someone had been breathing in it a moment ago. I told myself it was a glitch. I stepped in. The panel inside looked normal. I pressed 1. Nothing happened. Then, slowly, the light behind 3 lit up. The doors closed. I should have stepped out. I didn't. I don't know why. I stood still, watching the numbers above the door, 2, then 3. The elevator stopped. Doors opened. Same hallway. Same color walls. Same unnatural quiet. I stepped out, this time without hesitation. I needed to see it again. Not to prove anything. Just to be sure. Nothing had changed. 3 rooms left to right. That desk. That light buzz. I walked slowly, listening for movement, expecting sound, finding none. The air was still metallic. The kind of stale that settles inside old copper pipes. I opened the first room. Empty. Second. Empty. Third. I paused. The monitor still blinked. Still no vitals. Still that single green line, steady and flat. A heartbeat waiting to exist. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. At the far end of the hall, beyond the desk. Another corridor. I hadn't noticed it the first time. Maybe it hadn't been there. I walked toward it, each step echoing strangely off the floor. Quieter than it should have been. Muted. The corridor turned left, then ended abruptly at a door. Not a patient room. No number. Just a plain metal door. Slightly rusted around the frame, like it hadn't been opened in years. But it wasn't locked. I pushed it gently. It opened into a stairwell. The steps led down into darkness. The kind of dark that absorbs sound. No exit signs, no wall lights. Just a vague sense that there was space beyond. I didn't go down. But I stayed there a while. At the threshold. Listening. I thought I heard something. Not footsteps. Not breathing. Buzzing. Like electricity, but slower. More organic. As if it pulsed. I stepped back. Closed the door. Felt its weight settle into the frame. When I turned, I caught a glimpse of movement. At the edge of the desk chair, just as I passed, something shifted. I froze. Waited. Nothing. I walked faster. Made it back to the elevator. Pressed 1. This time, the doors didn't close right away. They waited. I don't know how long. Long enough for me to feel watched. Long enough to doubt if the hallway behind me was still empty. When the doors finally shut, I didn't look back. The ride down was silent. But something inside me felt fuller. Like I'd brought something back. Not a thing. Just wait. When the doors opened to the first floor, it felt wrong. Off. Like I was watching the hospital through a screen instead of being in it. The hallway lights buzzed louder than usual. Colder. I finished my shift without speaking. No one noticed anything unusual. I didn't write anything down. Back in the locker room, I sat on the bench, jacket half on, staring at the floor. My hands felt dry. My palms slightly sticky. When I stood up to leave, I noticed something on my sleeve. A faint green smear. Like dust. Or moss. Not wet. Not fresh. But unmistakable. I touched it. Rubbed it between my fingers. It flaked away. That was 5 years ago. I haven't worked a night shift since. But sometimes, I dream in green light. And always, from the end of the hallway, I hear the buzzing. Waiting for me to open the door again. Story 4. There's someone living in my drive-thru. I worked the night shift at Burger Joint off Route 89 during the summer of 2019. It was the kind of place that looked like it had been there since the late 80s. Flat roof, faded red signage, one flickering neon open sign that buzzed louder when it rained. If you've driven past it, you wouldn't remember. It sat alone on the edge of town, just before the overpass, where the streetlights thin out and the desert starts reclaiming the land. I took the job because it was night work. Quiet. Minimal people. I had just finished high school, wasn't going to college, didn't have plans beyond covering my half of rent at the trailer park and maybe saving for a beat-up car. The manager, Steve, liked me because I didn't complain and showed up sober. That's all it took to work nights there. Most shifts went the same. I clocked in at 10:45, scrubbed whatever the day crew left behind, and waited for the few graveyard drivers, cops, truckers, a tired nurse or two. I'd mop, restock the condiments, maybe play a podcast too low to really hear. Between 2 and 4 a.m., the place was still. The only thing that moved was the drive-thru camera. That's how I noticed it. The camera was old. Grainy. Mounted above the menu board, it fed a live black and white image to a tiny monitor beside the fry station. When a car pulled up, it dinged once, lit the screen, and stayed active until the vehicle reached the window. Most nights, it barely came on. One Tuesday, about 3 weeks into the job, I was cleaning the shake machine when the monitor clicked on. The chime followed, sharp and flat. I wiped my hands, looked up. No car. Just static and dark shapes, brush, the edge of the lot, a sliver of the ordering speaker. I figured it glitched. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes it picked up a gust of wind, or a bird landing nearby. I reset it. The screen went black. 10 minutes later, it buzzed on again. Still no car. This time, the speaker post was visible. Something tall blocked part of it. I leaned closer. The image was too soft to be clear. Maybe a reflection? Maybe one of those cardboard standees Steve used for monthly promotions? But we didn't have any outside. I stepped out the side door to check. The drive-thru lane was empty. The speaker was clean. No one there. Back inside, the monitor had gone dark again. I told myself the feed had glitched. That maybe it froze on an old frame and looped. That happens sometimes. Still, I avoided looking at it for the rest of the night. The next shift was normal. A couple of cars early on, then the usual dead stretch. The monitor stayed off until close to 3 a.m. That same flat chime. It clicked on. Again, no car. But someone was there. Just standing behind the speaker. Too far from the lens to make out clearly. Tall. Maybe wearing a hood or coat, something that caught the glare and made the head look oversized. I stared for a few seconds, waiting for the figure to move forward, come to the window. It didn't. I opened the side door and stepped into the heat. Nothing. The air smelled like fryer oil and asphalt. There was no sound but the hum of the soda machine behind me. I walked around to the speaker. Empty. I didn't see anyone on the road. No footsteps in the dust along the curb. I went back inside. The monitor had gone dark again. I stood still for a while, unsure what to feel. Not scared. Not yet. Just confused. The place wasn't big enough to play tricks like that. It was one long hallway with friars on one side, the prep counter on the other, and a set of glass double doors at the front. There wasn't anywhere to hide. I brought it up to Steve the next day, casually. Told him the camera was acting weird. He laughed. "It's a busted feed," he said. "Picks up garbage movements sometimes. Dust, bugs, headlights. Don't waste your time with it." I didn't say anything more. The next few nights were quiet again. Until Friday. It was almost 4 a.m. I was restocking sauce packets when the monitor chimed. I didn't look up immediately. When I did, I froze. The camera was showing the inside of the restaurant. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. The angle was wrong. Then I recognized the prep station. My station. The grainy black and white image was tilted, like the camera had been placed on the floor. I could see my feet. I stepped back. On the monitor, I saw it too. I moved left. The feed followed. Like someone was filming from behind me. I spun around. No one there. The air was still. Lights buzzed above. Fryer oil hissed once, settled. The screen flickered, then went dark. I stood in the center of the kitchen, unsure how long I'd been holding my breath. No chime. No sound. Just silence. Eventually, I finished my tasks. Cleaned. Clocked out. When I got to my bike, I paused before unlocking the chain. Looked back at the restaurant. The drive-through monitor sat dark behind the window. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching long before the screen turned on. The next night, I didn't want to go in. I sat on the curb outside the restaurant for almost 10 minutes, helmet still on, sweat running down my neck. The sky above the desert was low and orange, and the street out front was empty, as usual. No cars. No noise but the distant hum of the freeway. I told myself the camera had glitched. That someone had spliced the feed, or maybe a loop had gotten stuck in the system. Still, I waited until the very last minute to unlock the side door and punch in. Inside, everything was the same. Too clean. The kind of clean that feels unnatural. Plastic counters, paper signs taped crooked, lights that buzzed unevenly. I went through the motions, checked the fryers, refilled the ice bin, count change at the register. At some point, the routine started to settle in again. But I didn't wear the headset. It was part of the uniform, technically. The headset let us hear drive-through orders, and it chimed when someone pulled up. I left it sitting on the hook next to the monitor. No one else was working with me that night, so no one noticed. I kept glancing at the screen. Nothing. For almost 3 hours, the monitor stayed dark. I felt stupid for being jumpy. I even started humming under my breath, some old song I didn't really know the lyrics to. At 2:43 a.m., the chime went off. The screen lit up. Something was standing behind the ordering speaker again. Same place. Same distance. The frame caught just part of the figure, one shoulder, the shape of a head, something too tall to be average. It didn't move. It never did. I stayed behind the prep counter and watched. After a few seconds, the feed glitched, just once, like static being yanked, and then cleared. The figure was gone. I didn't check outside this time. I kept working. I just dropped a fresh basket into the fryer when the headset clicked. That soft little pop it makes when it turns on. Except I wasn't wearing it. It was still on the hook. The light on the side blinked green. Then a low hiss came through, like someone breathing near a microphone. I stepped back, hands still gloved, oil spitting behind me. The headset was glowing steadily now. On. Active. Another click. Then silence. I took it off the hook and yanked the battery. The light went out. But the sound kept going. A soft, dragging breath, tinny and close. Then a whisper. "Can you hear me?" I dropped it. It clattered against the tile. Still making that sound, still whispering, even with no power. I kicked it under the counter and stood there for what felt like an hour. Eventually it went quiet. The monitor didn't turn on again that night. When Steve came in at 5, I told him the headset was broken. He shrugged. Been needing replacements for a year. Toss it. I'll order a new one. I nodded. I didn't tell him what it said. That morning, I rode home without looking in the mirrors. Not once. The next shift started normally. A few early customers, a police cruiser at midnight, then dead air. I didn't wear the replacement headset. Just turned the speaker volume up a little. At 3:10, the chime went off again. I looked at the monitor. Empty lot. Speaker post. Brush in the background. A scrap of paper caught in the wind. Then movement. Not toward the camera, from behind it. Like something stepped sideways into frame. But only a sliver of it. Just enough to notice. The audio clicked on. But there was no voice. Just the sound of the soda machine. From inside. I muted the feed and stepped to the front windows. No cars. I walked the perimeter of the kitchen. Checked the locks. They were secure. I stood near the drink station for a long time, listening. Then the soda machine hissed. It wasn't pouring. The sound wasn't coming from the nozzles. It was coming from behind the wall. Like someone was imitating the noise. I turned everything off. The machines. The music. Even the back freezer fan. Silence. Except for the faint hum of the monitor. I sat in the break room, door open, eyes fixed on the hallway to the kitchen. It stayed quiet for the rest of the night. But when I went to mop before closing, I noticed the floor tiles near the drive-through window were smeared. Not wet. Not dirty. Just rubbed. Like something had stood there a long time, shifting slightly in place. The mats hadn't been moved. But the mark stayed. 2 days later, on my night off, I went by during daylight. The place looked different under the sun. Smaller. Less imposing. I went inside and asked the day crew if the cameras had been replaced recently. They said no. I asked if they'd ever seen anything strange on the monitor. They laughed. That thing barely works, one of them said. Flickers out all the time. Doesn't mean anything. I asked to see the security footage. The assistant manager said we don't keep it past 24 hours. Storage policy. Too expensive otherwise. I nodded. On the way out, I glanced toward the menu board. A small black smudge sat behind the speaker. Like a person's shadow. I thought about quitting. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or confrontation. Just quietly, stop showing up, block Steve's number, let the job dissolve. I even drafted the text on my phone more than once. But I didn't send it. Rent was due. I didn't have other options. Besides, part of me still believed it might stop on its own. That was the lie I told myself. On my final night, I came in early. I hadn't slept much. Everything in my apartment felt too loud, ceiling fan, refrigerator, the hum of my own breath. It was easier to be back at the restaurant, surrounded by sounds I could name. For a while. By midnight, everything had returned to that strange, artificial calm. Grease warm, light steady, kitchen wiped clean. I didn't wear the headset. It hadn't worked since the last time. The monitor stayed off for the first couple hours. I kept my back to it anyway. Every time I passed it, I felt the air shift, like walking through steam that wasn't there. At 2:36 a.m., the chime went off. I turned slowly. The camera was aimed lower this time. It showed the pavement. The corner of the speaker. And bare feet. No face. No body. Just a pair of feet, dirty, unmoving, at the very bottom of the frame. They weren't standing like someone waiting to order. They were too close. As if pressed up against the speaker, almost touching it. The feed flickered. Then went black. No sound. No movement. I walked to the side door and pressed my ear to the metal. Silence. I didn't open it. Back inside, the monitor stayed off. The air smelled strange. Like heat trapped in wires. Burned dust, maybe? My shirt stuck to the middle of my back, even though the air conditioner ran constantly. I kept wiping the counter, even though it was already clean. At 3:11, the headset clicked. It was still on the hook. No lights. No battery. Just a soft pop, followed by static. Then a voice. "You're the only one who hears me." Not a whisper this time. Not distorted. Clear. Familiar, almost. It didn't sound angry. It sounded patient. I didn't move. The speaker continued softer now. "You let me in." Something shifted in the kitchen. Not sound. Not sight. Space. The air thickened. I walked to the front counter and flipped the breaker to cut the speaker. The static stopped. But I still felt it. Behind me. Not close, but present. Like being watched through one-way glass. I stood in the center of the floor for what must have been 10 minutes. Then the soda machine hissed. Only it wasn't the machine. It was too low. Too long. Like breath drawn through clenched teeth. I turned and saw nothing. But I knew. I walked into the freezer, not because I needed anything, but because I needed a door with a latch. The cold shocked me back into my body. I stood there, shivering, hands tucked under my arms, trying to control my breath. There were no cameras inside. No speakers. Just silence. That's when I noticed the noise. A slow tapping. Behind the wall. Measured. Like someone pressing a finger, then lifting it. Again and again. Not trying to get in. Just marking time. I stared at the shelves. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Eventually, the sound stopped. When I came out, the kitchen lights had dimmed. Only slightly. Barely noticeable. But I could tell. Everything looked the same, but felt wrong. Like I'd stepped into a version of the restaurant that wasn't mine. Every corner seemed deeper. Every surface more porous. I checked the monitor. It was on. But the feed didn't show the outside. It showed the front counter. Where I was standing. I leaned toward it. On the screen I didn't move. I blinked. The image blinked half a second later. Not a glitch. A delay? Like it was trying to catch up. I stepped back. The version of me on the screen stared straight ahead. Then it smiled. Small. Off. Nothing happened after that. No sounds. No flickers. Just silence. At 5 a.m., I mopped the floor, washed my hands, and clocked out. I didn't speak to Steve. I didn't speak to anyone. I biked home with the rising sun at my back, and the screen door groaned like it hadn't been touched in days. I didn't go back. I didn't quit either. I just stopped showing up. No one called. The check arrived in the mail 2 weeks later. That should have been the end. But things lingered. The night stayed loud, even in silence. My walls creaked more. My phone buzzed with no messages. I unplugged the router for a week, but the screen on my old laptop still turned on by itself. Just a white light. No input. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear that click. The one the headset made when the voice came through. And sometimes, when I lie in bed too still for too long, I feel something shift in the corner of the room. Not a figure. Not a sound. Just a presence, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I never do. Because I know once I answer, it'll know where I live.